Hello, I'm Andrew Pritchard, and thank you for watching today's Canada Regional Forecast, brought to you by Nutrien Solutions. So we talk about the next week overall. Really going to be talking about some cooler temperatures, especially in this region, kind of north and west of the Canadian Prairie, but still seeing an appendage of that, some cooler weather over the next week or so spilling into the Canadian Prairie. Also watching for increased precipitation chances here in a corridor that starts along coastal areas of British Columbia, but then through northern and central portions of the Canadian Prairie as well, through northern and central Alberta, then really northern portions of Saskatchewan and Manitoba. And we'll talk about all of that here in a minute. Not talking about any widespread severe weather chances. You don't see any red shading on the map this week. Again, dealing with a cooler air mass, one that's not going to be supportive of the big-time thunderstorms that are wreaking havoc with severe weather. So we look at the jet stream here on Friday morning. We've got zonal flow kind of across the lower 48 right now across the United States and near the U.S.-Canada border, but a huge mass when we look off towards the Pacific Ocean. And this big mass really plays into what we're going to be seeing that spills into parts of the United States and Canada over the next 7 to 10 days, which is why we really are in a predictability period here right now that is very low in confidence once we get beyond the next week or so. So we'll focus here on the next, the next 7 days or so in this video, but anything that goes beyond that really having some trust issues, I guess, with some of our longer term guidance. As we look at the temperature forecast here for the next 10 days, the first 5 days on the left, watching this area of cooler temperatures again across the Canadian prairies. As we get into the next 5 days there, August 22nd through the 26th, we'll watch for this cooler air to begin to sink down into parts of the Midwest and the northeastern United States, parts of the Corn Belt here, while we allow some warmer weather to build into a corridor here through the Canadian prairies, at least bringing it back to average, but warmer for some of you, especially in the southern prairie once we get into mid to late next week. The precipitation forecast here, week 1 and week 2. Week 1 on the left, this is where we got higher confidence right now with that corridor of higher precipitation through northern and central parts of Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. As we get into the week 2 time frame, again, low confidence right now. It wants to bring us back to average, keeping things pretty close to average across the Canadian Prairie. That sometimes is a symptom of the models losing some of the details with such uncertainty out there, kind of blending together and dissolving the details that might be found there. We've also got this corridor of wetter conditions showing up across parts of the Corn Belt that, again, low confidence, not ready to call for that. So let's just, we'll forget about this map, but focus in on here where we've got drier conditions to the south, wetter conditions off to the north for the next week. Looking at the satellite picture here on early Friday morning, again, we see the counterclockwise flow around this area of low pressure making its way through the Canadian prairies, bringing some rain activity to the northern and central portions of the area. Again, staying dry. It'll be a very pleasant Friday across southern portions of the Canadian prairie, and then clusters of thunderstorms off to the south across parts of the central United States as well early this morning. Underneath those clouds, here's a look at the radar loop here again, early Friday morning, so if you're watching this video later in the day on Friday, perhaps take an updated look at the radar. Right now, the heaviest rain activity between Edmonton and Saskatoon right now along that frontal boundary that extends from the area of low pressure off to the north. So watching for this rain and shower activity to continue through this area and then off to the west or the east-northeast over the next 24 hours or so. So where are we going then with the jet stream? We're looking at the 500 millibar height anomalies right now. This is the mess that we're looking at right now. Each one of these little perturbations in the flow responsible for some areas of showers and storms. We've got rain activity across the Corn Belt in the United States, rain activity across northern and central portions of the Canadian Prairie as well. Let's take a look at how this evolves, though, over the next week or so. We get the scroller up here. We'll bring it back to Friday. This is the upper level low right now, this kind of alignment where we've got northerly flow that's bringing in the cooler weather from the north, keeping us cool here across the Canadian Prairie. But as we go through the weekend into early next week, we certainly see that trough kind of holding on into the early parts of next week before it breaks. We kind of see this thing split, where one end of it goes off towards the east, bringing cooler weather into the Corn Belt. You see it plunge in right there. That's what brings cooler weather into the Corn Belt, at least the eastern Corn Belt, mid to late next week. But at the same time that happens, we build a major ridge into the Canadian Prairie. So this displaces the cooler weather we're seeing now, takes that off to the southeast, and this means by the time we get to mid to late next week, perhaps looking at a warm-up for most of us here across the Canadian Prairie, at least getting closer to average, if not a little bit above average, off to the south here as we get to mid to late next week. Let's take this out a little bit further, though. because that's not where we stop. We see this ridge now kind of breaking and leaning over towards the to the east, and then we start to bring in an active pattern again, at least for some across the Canadian Prairie. We see these troughs starting to line up and race across. This might be another pattern that keeps us active across northern portions of the prairie and drier and warmer off to the south. We'll have to look at the details as we get into early next week, so definitely more clarity as we get into our Tuesday morning Canadian Prairie forecast. But right now, this is just kind of what it looks like. It's a progressive pattern, cooler for the next 5 days or so, perhaps warmer mid to late next week, but then shifting back to a more active pattern where we're maybe cooler north, warmer north, warmer south, rainy north, drier south as we head into mid to late next week. Draw that on there if it doesn't make enough sense there as we get into mid to late next week. Cool, wet, warm, dry. There. Now, even if you're watching me on mute, you got the picture there. Cool and wet to the north, warm and dry to the south. That would be my best guess as to where we're headed next weekend. Taking a look at the flow within the jet stream here, this corridor of stronger winds, that is what's responsible for the storms and the severe weather across the Midwest and the United States. This trough, this patch of stronger winds right now, that is kicking off the rain activity we saw there between Edmonton and Saskatoon, right on that little front, making its way through parts of the Central Prairie early on this Friday morning. If I take my drawings off, take a look at where we are headed beyond this. We will scroll through time, taking it through Friday and then into Saturday. Again, keep northwesterly flow across the Canadian Prairie here, keeping the cooler weather pumping into the region, at least into early next week. And then we see a reversal in the flow. Now we're seeing that ridge build in. This is what would bring some heat into the Canadian Prairie by the time we get to mid to late next week. But then again, kicking things back into an active pattern. Look at how much more organized things become, though. If we look at what's going on right now, we've got, a short wave here, short waves up there, stronger winds coming out of the northwest. By the time we get to next weekend, perhaps seeing things kind of clean up, just having this corridor of stronger zonal flow across the Canadian Prairie that could, again, keep the showers and storms in the forecast for some of us across the prairie until late next week into the weekend. Our temperature anomaly forecast, you're going to see lots of blues and greens spilling into this region here at the beginning of the loop, then watching for that to shift off to the southeast across the Midwest next week. Let's scroll through time with this one as well. Bringing it back, let's see if we got the scroller bar. There we go. All the way back to Friday morning. The core of the coolest air making its way in after Sunday. So really, we got some cooler weather spilling into the region now, but it's as we get into Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, seeing the core of the coolest air extending into the Canadian Prairie here. This is temperatures anywhere from 5 to 15 degrees below average. More than that as you head up towards the northwest. This is where the core of the coolest air is really going to be locked in there. But then again, really taking us into mid next week. Now you see it start to break off. We're starting to see that lobe of cooler air making its way off to the southeast as we get into midweek. We're looking at Wednesday now, getting into Thursday and Friday. There you see warmth starting to build back in. This is when we've got that ridge developing in the jet stream across the prairie mid to late next week. And then as we get into next weekend, this is where I think maybe we get into a pattern where it's warmer overall to the south, cooler overall to the north, and keeping things active across the middle part there, but at least bringing it back to average as we get to next week. This cooler pattern looks like it's got a lifespan of maybe 4 to 5 days, as it looks right now on Friday morning, subject to change again with this very frustrating pattern where we almost have a different look every single model run. So again, cut me some slack if we do extend this cooler pattern, but right now it looks like it breaks right around Wednesday or Thursday of next week. As we take a look at the instability forecast, I show this to kind of gauge the air mass in place, whether it's supportive of big-time thunderstorms and severe weather. Play this out for the week, and what you're going to see is a whole lot in the way of instability off to the south, across the Midwest, across the northern plains of the U.S. Look at that. Very active in that region. Quiet across this region, so while we keep rain in the forecast for northern and central portions of the Canadian Prairie, not talking about any major severe weather outbreaks or severe weather events over the next 5 to 7 days, which is good news. So we take a look at the precipitation forecast that accompanies all of this, bringing it back. This is our first major storm system making its way through the area here Friday, Saturday. Perhaps some blustery conditions accompanying this one across Alberta for the day on Friday, and then getting into parts of Saskatchewan and Manitoba on Saturday, seeing surface wind gusts anywhere from 25 to 40 knots. So certainly a blustery weekend for some of us in the prairie here Friday and Saturday. Watching for this heavy rain to move off. We're getting into Saturday now, seeing the heavier rain moving across northern and central portions of Saskatchewan and Manitoba for the day on Saturday. Watching a next storm system emerge now on Sunday across Alberta. Look at this cooler air, snow across northern British Columbia. Obviously higher elevations in that area, but We are getting closer and closer to that time, and this is certainly a strong and unseasonably strong push of cooler air, so a little early for things like this, these blues to be showing up, but here it is anyway, talking about some snow in the higher elevations. Keeping things wet, though, across the northern and central portions of the prairie. Across southern areas, drier overall, but not bone dry. Some of you are going to see some isolated shower and storm activity as we head through the weekend into early next week. As we take this out beyond, really going to be warming up and then quieting down at least for a couple of days across the Canadian prairie. It looks like Tuesday, Wednesday, maybe a lull there before we get back to this active pattern where we've got low confidence again, but again, this one looks like maybe one that keeps things active at least across northern portions of the Canadian prairie as we get into late next week with storm systems beginning to eject out of the west, quickly racing across the area. Again, where we actually get at the end of next week into next weekend, a lot of question marks, so we'll talk more about that as we get into our Tuesday morning forecast, but just kind of spelling it out for you, I guess, over the next week or so across the prairie. Wetter in this corridor along and north of the Canadian prairies here, off to the south of this line. Drier overall, but still some opportunities for showers and storms. Cooler over the next 4 to 5 days, and then once we get into the end of next week, around Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, likely going to be warming up, at least for some of us across the Canadian prairie. Zooming in across Alberta here, looking at the total accumulated precipitation for the next week, this takes us through Friday. And there again, we see this corridor where coastal areas of British Columbia picking up a lot of rain, and then northern portions of Alberta, northern and central portions of Alberta certainly picking up the opportunity for anywhere between 20 to 30 millimeters of rain, locally higher spots here, especially across maybe northwestern or northeastern Alberta here, maybe a hot spot there picking up a little bit more than that. So we look at the high temperatures again, cooler weather in place here for the day on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. This is when we see the core of that really cool air. Check it out, dropping below zero, below freezing across northern British Columbia and the higher elevations there. Here's your high temperature for the day on Monday. Now we've got some opportunities for some frost in the highest elevation there, but we're not talking about frost just yet in the agricultural producing areas of Alberta right now, but getting close, and I know that's something we'll have to talk about more and more, but high elevations, definitely the opportunity to drop below zero, the opportunity for some snow here, especially across northern portions of British Columbia. Let's jump ahead though, high temperatures for Monday and then Tuesdays when we start to warm up, getting back to seasonally appropriate levels, high temperatures anywhere from the mid to the lower 20s by the time we get to Tuesday. Now looking off to the east again, rainier off to the north, drier off to the south, opportunities for isolated or scattered storms across southern portions, but really the hot spot is going to be off to the north here across northern Saskatchewan and Manitoba over the next week. Your high temperature forecast warmer for the day, especially across southern Manitoba here on Friday. High temperatures in the upper 20s in that region, lower teens off to the north where we are more rainy with cloud cover. Jumping ahead, looking at Saturday and then Sunday, Monday, and then Tuesday, really cooler overall, but then it's as we get into the end of the week, mid to late next week, now starting to build some warmth. Would imagine we'll be talking about low to mid 20s across this region as we get into Thursday and Friday. As always, Eric Snodgrass will have an in-depth look at the evolution of the next 1 to 2 weeks in our Monday morning ag forecast video. I'll have your next look at the Canadian prairie on Tuesday morning. Have a great day and a wonderful weekend.